Good evening, attendees of the Young Women's Resource Center Gala. It is with great honor that I get to introduce to you Rekha Basu this evening. Roxanne Conlon and I nominated Rekha for the Louise Noun Award because we believe that she exemplifies the example of what it is to be a champion of equal rights for women. Her many years as a columnist at the Des Moines Register have served to shed light on the injustices done to women. She was born in India and schooled in the United States. Her mother and father worked for the United Nations. She is bilingual and has a gift of finding injustice wherever she sees it. She is also an example for young women of what it means to be in the forefront of inclusiveness for all. It is with great enthusiasm that I have the privilege to introduce you to Rekha Basu, the 2021 recipient of the Louise Noun Visionary Award.
Thank you so much to the Young Women's Resource Center for this great honor, and to Susan Knapp and Roxanne Conlon, who nominated me for it. I'm humbled and will especially cherish it because it's named for my late friend, Louise Noun. I also want to congratulate Barbara Adams, the first recipient of your new Impact Award, which she so richly deserves. Though she's modest, I'm well aware of the high standards Barb sets and the unconditional support and lengths to which she's willing to go to stand up for her students and staff. When I moved to Des Moines from New York 30 years ago to write opinions for the Des Moines Register, I was already committed to gender equality and the struggle for equal rights for women and girls. In fact, that was the primary reason I chose this paper, because it had a strong female editor in Geneva Overholzer, under whose leadership the Register had won the Pulitzer Prize the previous year for a series on a rape survivor's story. But I later realized that until moving here, what I knew about the struggles of young women and girls was primarily through a global lens and secondhand. I would write about what girls in Afghanistan were up against, secretly trying to get an education under the patriarchal Taliban regime, or how young Indian women who were having arranged marriages might be deliberately burned by their husband's parents because they hadn't brought in a sufficient bride price or dowry from their parents. I'd written about female genital mutilation in various countries, which, like so many destructive traditional practices, stemmed from a deep-seated fear of female sexuality and the notion that it needed suppressing. Rapes were a form of class warfare between landlord and tenant woman, and of colonial warfare. To the victor went the spoils, those spoils being women's bodies. In the 3 decades since I moved to Iowa, I've learned up close about the experiences of American women and girls and the many de facto ways in which society can disempower them. I've seen how men of privilege, be they a small-town doctor or an athletic coach, can get away with years of sexually abusing female patients or students while subordinates or community members cover it up and trash the girls for speaking out instead. I saw how a 15-year-old high school student in Mason City was harassed in phone calls, in slurs, graffiti scribbled on school walls, and even physical assaults because she'd had the temerity to break up with a controlling boyfriend. And to my amazement, the school's response was to say it couldn't protect her from the 20-something students who were taking part. So she'd have to have private tutoring in the superintendent's office every day instead of being allowed back in the classroom. And I saw how a student at a Catholic high school in Des Moines was expelled after reporting that she'd been raped at school by a fellow student. He wasn't punished, but she was for mouthing off in anger about that. I learned about every one of these cases because the girls were savvy and courageous enough to share their stories with me for publication, sometimes even at their own instigation. And I watched them become empowered in the process of finding their voices as we blasted the people and institutions that had harmed them or stayed silent. Because even if the institutions weren't following the rules or laws, at least those rules and laws were in place. So the young woman from Mason City ended up winning a lawsuit against the school district. and the abusive doctor had his license revoked, and the abusive coach was fired. And 15 years after the Catholic school student was expelled, she phoned me to say that she had left Des Moines and pulled her life together. But she'd carried the column around all those years to remind herself that someone had believed her. She said sometimes it was all that had prevented her from ending her own life. Which brings us to the work that you do every day at the Young Women's Resource Center to save lives, empower, educate, and cheer on those young women who need it. And to the work that Louise, the real visionary, did when she first envisioned the need for an agency of this kind. These days, I'm getting such joy from watching young women, both white and of color, who began marching in the Black Liberation Movement before the summer against police brutality. And many have gone on to educate themselves about other areas of economic and social injustice in the world and in Iowa. And in their own lived experiences, they're learning their own transformative powers in the world. Some are now even running for office. But we all have a job to do in challenging wrong-headed initiatives by our various political institutions, especially these days our state legislature. One of its bills would hurt transgender kids by forcing them to go to the bathrooms of their gender at birth. Another would limit diversity trainings in school that might make people feel bad about America's slave-owning past. A third would impose a constitutional amendment against abortion in Iowa. And it goes on. These are not the Iowa values or laws that I learned when I moved here 3 decades ago. Finally, I dedicate this award to my late mother, Rekha Basu, who died in India at age 96, a few months before the pandemic broke out. She spent her lifetime rejecting patriarchy's grip and speaking truth to power. And she was my greatest role model and my longest lasting +1. Over the years, she, like me, made many cherished friends in Iowa, and I thank all of you who have gathered tonight to honor all of us and the cause. Thank you.